Hello shiny happy YouTube people, it's Dave
and Jacob,
back once again like the renegade masters we are to bring you the tech.
And today we've got a pair of brand new super fast SSDs, the Samsung EVO Plus and the 2019 edition of the WD Black, the SN750.
Yes, these are the first new SSDs of the year, but can the plucky Western Digital SSD upstage the might of Samsung?
The traditional wisdom would suggest not. Samsung is the king of solid-state storage ever since it decided to own the market by being one of the first to combine its own homebrew memory controller with its own NAND flash silicon.
At the point it made the switch, the SSD market was awash with Me Too brands all either using the Marvell or SandForce memory controllers and whatever off-the-shelf memory they could find.
Samsung decided to do it all in-house, which meant it could control pricing and eventually managed to undercut and outperform everyone else.
But the SSD market in 2019 is a very different place to those days, with far fewer companies vying for your speedy storage dollar, but Samsung doesn't have it all its own way.
Crucial has been one of the few brands keeping the Korean giant on its game, using parent company Micron's memory and whatever Marvell or Silicon Motion controller could get the job done at a decent price.
But Crucial hasn't been keeping up in the burgeoning NVMe SSD market, and that's where Western Digital has started to make up ground, following Samsung's lead, creating its own controllers and acquiring memory manufacturers itself. We've previously checked out the 2018 version of the enthusiast-focused WD Black drive, and a competitive drive it was too, both in performance and price.
Samsung has kept the pressure on, however, slashing prices as memory costs drop along with demand, all the while keeping performance at the heart of what it does.
But where it has long been the no-brainer SSD of choice, Western Digital's new drive is here to make the decision on which drive to buy a much tougher one.
First off, it has to be said that while these are nominally new SSDs, they are both rather iterative updates on their respective drives, rather than a whole new generation of NVMe storage.
The Samsung 970 EVO Plus does use its latest 96-layer 3D 3-bit MLC memory, but it has also added in some firmware optimizations to the Phoenix memory controller. That was the one that it introduced with the original 970 EVO SSDs. But that is the same essential controller, the same 5-core design sporting the same intelligent turbo write, performance-enhancing algorithms too.
But those optimizations have allowed Samsung to boost the sequential performance of its EVO Plus drive, most especially on the write speed.
The new SSD is rated at 3500 and 3300 megabytes per second for its rated read and write performance, where the previous 970 EVO came in at 3400 and 2500 megabytes per second respectively.
That's a huge bump in write performance and means the new drive is getting mighty close to the theoretical limits of the PCIe 3.0 interface with its 4 GB per second or 32 gigabit per second speed.
Outside of the internal specs, Samsung has also added in nickel plating around the Phoenix controller to mitigate the increased heat it generates over the older Polaris controller of the 960 generation drives.
Western Digital has similarly opted for evolution rather than revolution with its new drive, using the exact same NAND flash and WD in-house triple-core memory controller, but with a few firmware optimization of its own to bump up performance.
That means this 1TB version uses the same 256GB 64-layer 3D TLC memory made by SanDisk Toshiba. While the relationship status on Facebook is complicated between those three, to all intents and purposes we can think of that being in-house memory too.
In terms of the rated sequential speeds of the new drive, WD is claiming to hit 3,470 megabytes a second reads and 3,000 megabytes per second writes. In other words, a little less than the competing Samsung SSD.
Western Digital is also keenly aware of the thermal issues that have sometimes plagued NVMe drives too, and will be shipping SKUs of the WD Black SN750 with an EKWB cooling block, though that will add a chunk onto the ticket price and isn't coming out for a while.
And is a little pointless.
Yes, and is a little pointless. Yes, because the performance of this bare WD drive is actually already pretty darned good on the thermal side anyway.
Benchmarking new SSDs has to start with a simple veracity check. Do the published marketing performance numbers actually stack up in the real world?
Yeah, to that end, we stick a fresh install of Windows 10 onto each new drive and throw the Atto disk benchmark at them to check what the peak sequential read and write performance of the SSDs actually is.
Atto uses compressible data, so it allows you to see the various manufacturers' controller-based compression algorithms coming to the fore to bolster the drive's performance.
And it actually looks a lot better for the WD drive here than for the Samsung. Where Samsung is reporting 3500 and 3300 megabytes per second for its read and write performance, we actually measured 3487 and 3174 megabytes per second respectively. That's pretty close on the read speeds, but way off from the super fast write performance we were promised.
That said, 3174 megabytes per second is still absolutely the fastest write performance you will find on any consumer SSD, but it is still a fair way short of its rated speed.
Which makes the WD marketing material look a touch more honest. The WD Black is rated at 3470 and 3000 megabytes per second, and we've measured 3464 and 3026 megabytes per second, which is about as near as makes no frickin' odds.
And also means that there is very little difference between the two drives in terms of sequential performance, a fact that is backed up by the SSD test running incompressible data, such as already compressed video and image files, where again the results are mighty close. The 970 EVO Plus does edge ahead, but it's only even by small margins.
The 970 EVO Plus does show a little more daylight when it comes to the 4K random read-write performance. These are the tiny little file transfers that illustrate how slick a drive will be during normal OS operations, the constantly fetching and carrying of data.
The WD Black delivers half the read speed of the Samsung drive, and is off the pace, admittedly by less, when it comes to the 4K random write speed.
But that's just the synthetic benchmarks, however. We also test the speed at which you can compress a 5GB game folder and how fast the drive can copy a 30GB folder of mixed file types.
Once more, it's incredibly close between the two drives, with the WD drive completing the compression test a couple of seconds faster and the Samsung able to squeeze over the line quicker on the 30GB copy.
So which should you buy? The Samsung 970 EVO Plus?
Or the new WD Black SN750? Honestly, it almost doesn't matter. Samsung and Western Digital have created two of the best consumer SSDs that we've ever tested, and there's one thing we haven't even touched on yet, and that's price.
Yeah, back in May 2018 when Samsung launched the 970 EVO, the 1TB version cost a princely $450. But thanks to Apple's falling iPhone demand and subsequent price cuts of the memory it was once attempting to hoard, SSD prices have crashed.
Which is great news for us, because this new 1TB EVO Plus drive costs just $250. It is, on the whole, faster, but also cheaper than the last gen SSD.
And that means WD has no choice but to match it. So the 1TB version of the WD Black is the same $250.
With all pricey things being equal, our recommendation is probably to still stick with the Samsung drive for your next SSD, but only because it has a slight performance lead. But in the real world, that performance lead will be practically invisible, so you should be just as happy with a WD Black drive as the Samsung 970 EVO Plus.
So if either one appears in a future sale, that will then become the de facto drive to buy.
Which is honestly a pretty surprising place to be, and means we're no longer in a situation where the choice is a no-brainer Samsung purchase. Western Digital has copied the Samsung MO and is competing toe-to-toe with the Korean giant at the very top of the SSD game.
It's almost too close to call then. The performance lead does still rest with Samsung, but only just, and is barely perceptible too.
So yay to Western Digital for offering genuine competition at the high end.
But yay to Samsung too, because both companies have produced the finest consumer SSDs around.
Thanks for watching, and remember all that likey, subscribey, campanologist shtick, and check out PCGamesN.com for more gaming, hardware, and Jacob and Dave stuff.
Yeah, toodles.
Bye!